Our final speaker is Rick Gold. He is the Regional Director for the Upper Colorado region of the Bureau of Reclamation. He has extensive experience in that bureau. Probably knows where most of the bodies are buried. And he has also currently been in charge of the studies for the operation of the Glen Canyon Dam, the EIS studies. Thank you.
One might suggest, however, that all the bodies aren't yet buried.
They submerged.
No, there's still a few conflicts to go. I don't have any modern technology to help you with. I do bring to you the greetings of Commissioner Bob Johnson, the Commissioner of Reclamation, which if you relied upon the early editions of the agenda you expected to see. I'm going to do my best to bring you Reclamation's perspective on this issue, and I've been asked to talk about dividing the pie, dealing with surplus and drought. The annual symposium here certainly is well known for tackling tough issues, just as Wallace Stegner never shied away from a controversial topic. I'm sure that you know his heritage, 60-year careers, 30 books, the classic Beyond the 100th Meridian for us, and his passion to preserve the West. Additionally, Stegner was influential during his years working at the Department of Interior during the Kennedy administration. As the speakers before me have discussed, we're collectively examining the compact, asking the key question: is it time for change? From my personal perspective, and that of every administration to serve from 1922 to the present, a span of 85 years, there is no compelling case to change the compact. Now, it's long been my belief that the compact, in fact, is an inspired gift to future generations, and it was hammered out under some extremely difficult circumstances. It represents the best of what may happen when the 7 basin states and the federal government sit down and work for common good. Is it perfect? Did everyone get an equal deal? Of course not. Is it flexible? Is there room for evolving issues and the various states' needs to be negotiated? Absolutely. Here's a terrific case in point. A year ago, February 5th, the headline in one of the West's leading environmental publications, High Country News, the headline was, "Colorado River States Reach Landmark Agreement." Matt Jenkins' article began with this paragraph, and let me quote, "Water from the Colorado River keeps 30 million people alive. It sustains a $1.2 trillion regional economy in cities like Los Angeles, Phoenix, Las Vegas, and Denver." Interesting. Only one of those is in the basin. And throughout the rural West. In recent years, however, drought and the competing urban growth have raised tensions among the 7 states that depend on the river. Now a groundbreaking agreement signals a new level of cooperation between those states and clears the way for the West's booming cities to buy water from farms, potentially even from farms in other states, to protect themselves in extreme drought. Close quote. That was the paragraph in High Country News. Jenkins went on to report that after, quote, "an intense final round of negotiations, the states announced an agreement," close quote, that would help all 7 basin states. And you've heard Don and Jerry allude to that already. In a few moments, I want to touch a little further on that, but first I want to emphasize that how important that states' negotiation and landmark decision reached over the past decade is. Because of the compact, we don't have to go back to square one and fight every battle from scratch. Negotiations and decisions build on each other. As issues and priorities and public policy evolve, the compact remains foundational. Think about what's happened over those past 85 years. The Boulder Canyon Act and the Colorado River Storage Act both passed the United States Congress, leading to the construction of Hoover Dam, Glen Canyon Dam, Flaming Gorge Dam, Navajo Dam, and the dams of the Aspinall Unit. And many of you are thinking, oh my God. But I would attest to you that many other things also happened as a result of that. We've seen participating projects that directly contribute to the local and the regional economies constructed in the Upper Basin. Among those, we had a question about Utah, among those the Central Utah Project in Utah. We've seen landmark environmental legislation enacted over the past 30-plus years, including the National Environmental Policy Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Water Act, the Grand Canyon Protection Act, just to name a few. The Upper Basin states enacted a compact between themselves, thus avoiding having the Secretary of Interior serve as their water master, as is the case in the Lower Basin. The United States and Mexico negotiated a treaty to bring resolution and the force of law to Mexico's share of the river and a means to protect water quality. Added to the management mix are several other benchmark items, including the Colorado River Basin Projects Act of 1968, which provided the rules for the operating criteria of Lake Powell and the Lake Mead, and the development of annual operating plans prepared each year by Reclamation in the Basin states and all the interested publics. Today we're dealing with droughts, shortage, surplus decisions, and innovative management solutions necessitated by the long-expected and approaching arrival of full development. Don touched on that. Let me just take an aside and have you think about what would happen in that last 85 years without that compact. Would any of that, or any of this, if you look at the development of the West, been possible? Over the same 85 years, then, we have heard that, from some, that the compact is no longer viable or useful and it needs to be renegotiated or replaced. From my perspective, thank goodness that common sense and good reason have prevailed. The compact remains, solutions continue to be discovered, and sanity prevails in the river. And I characterize, without that compact, chaos is what we would have in the Colorado River. Up to the present time, Reclamation has always managed to meet the water allocations from the Colorado River that were established with those 7 basin states in the Treaty to Mexico. But as the century began with a drought, this century, whose impacts continue even today, depending on if it's still snowing outside, the federal government and the states and those who depend on water supplies have entered an era of limitations, and you saw that. How much more is left for the Upper Basin? How much more is left for the Lower Basin? One of Reclamation's great commissioners, Elwood Mead, said, quote, "The problems of Western irrigation grow largely out of the fact that there's more land than water. If every drop of water which falls on the mountains of the West could be made available, there would not be enough to supply 1/2 of the land suited to irrigation." Now, that's an irrigation era kind of quote, but I think it still rings true if you talk about total use. There just isn't enough. The settlement of the Southwest was no different than any place else. Pioneers and developers followed the waterways. Take a look at where these cities are located. That's been the case for centuries in the Colorado River. The Native Americans' dependence upon the rivers is well documented, along with the spiritual significance in the Great Canyons and other landmarks of the area. The Spanish explorers, when they came, Dominguez and Escalante, traveled the region, crossing the Colorado close to Lee Ferry. Settlement was compounded for those early settlers by severe winters, which were followed by water shortages in the summer. Farmers from water-rich eastern states weren't prepared for the challenges of cultivating the West. Likewise, cities were constrained by the lack of a dependable and predictable water supply. As the 1800s turned into the 1900s, development of the Colorado River Basin led to friction between the states. And based on Don and Jerry, maybe that hasn't ended, huh? An era of contentious relationships was born. But it's important to note that out of necessity, the legal framework for the management process was developed across the Colorado River Basin. I have here some of the details I'm not going to repeat about what the compact did, the 7.5 million acre feet stuff. So I'm going to skip over that. We also saw what happens when the states can't agree upon a compact between them for allocation. The lower basin was essentially federalized by the United States Congress with the Boulder Canyon Act, 1928. The upper basin has succeeded in reaching a compact in 1948, and it set the stage for the Colorado River Storage Project of 1956. That Colorado River Storage Project Act also ratified the Upper Basin Compact, so it's an agreement among those states and the United States. As we take a look at some of the issues related to surplus and shortage, it's important to note that all the management and infrastructure decisions are predicated today upon the existence of 60 million acre feet of storage in the basin. You saw the debate about how much water is available. 4 times that annual amount is available in storage, and it's a very key part of why the system works. From the upper basin perspective, it starts with Glen Canyon Dam, and contrary to some viewpoints, Glen Canyon is the key to the upper basin, regardless of whether we're talking about shortages or surpluses. Glen Canyon Dam is not going away. No less an environmental voice than former Secretary Bruce Babbitt said that. No administration, Republican or Democratic, since the dam was built, has considered such an action of removing it. There's a quote here from Secretary Babbitt in a radio presentation he did in the year 2000, and he said, quote, regarding decommissioning of Glen Canyon Dam, quote, "The bottom line is it's not going to happen. I don't support taking down Glen Canyon Dam. It's in place. It's there to stay. It's an important asset. It's an important part of the economic and recreational life of Arizona and the Southwest." He went on to say many other things. I want to just touch on what he said about the compact. He said, "The compact, I think, is there to stay. It couldn't be changed effectively without 7 states and Congress, and there just isn't any prospect of that happening." Our now Secretary Kempthorne has on several observations also said, speaking last December, the Secretary said he believes mankind's relationship with the river has passed through 3 different eras. First, he says, was the era when the states signed the compact, which he called one of the most important negotiated agreements in American history. Second was that engineering era, that swooning part of what happened in the West. The reclamation built dams and canals and other infrastructure that greatly expanded our capacity to put the river's water and power to productive use. I'm proud of that. Reclamation blue runs in my blood, so I think that's a great accomplishment that allowed this basin, this Colorado River Basin, to prosper. Now, Secretary Kempthorne says we've entered a 3rd era where progress will not come through Herculean feats of engineering, but through effective management of the river's water. To be successful, he said, there are 4 principles we must adhere to. 1, cooperation's better than litigation. And I apologize to all the lawyers. I know that's livelihood I'm talking about, but in my judgment, that's the truth. Cooperation is better than litigation. The line between a negotiated solution that works for everybody and a costly battle in court is a thin one. And the Secretary says we must stay on the right side of that line. Second principle, we must continue to seek creative solutions. We've been innovative. We need to keep being innovative. Third principle, which I like a lot. Hope for the best. And plan for the worst. Very important principle. It's okay to hope, but you better plan for the worst. And finally, he said, in front of that audience, don't fumble in the red zone. He was talking football, and he was saying, hey, we're getting close to a huge breakthrough here. Don't fumble in the red zone. Get it done. Commissioner Bob Johnson has pointed out that collaboration and cooperation of water managers throughout the basin, coupled with diligent work by our staff, has created a record of accomplishment and commitment to ongoing actions that we can all be proud of. Through completing such agreements as the quantification settlement in the lower basin, the Upper Colorado River Endangered Fish Recovery Program, the Lower Colorado Multispecies Conservation Program, we're demonstrating that we can meet needs for agriculture, cities, and environmental requirements. Over the past several years, we've made tremendous progress by taking the long view and figuring out how we can meet multiple demands on water supplies. We have to continue that progress and keep pushing the boundaries of what we believe we can do in water management. Let me shift to a couple of things we're doing in a big way, and one of them directly relates to that state agreement. Shortage guidelines and coordinated operations. We have ongoing that environmental impact statement process to develop guidelines for the operation and management of Colorado River under potential shortage conditions and coordinated operation of Powell and Meade. It's a key priority for the department. The consensus agreement among the states is an extremely significant step in the right direction. I certainly commend their progress and their continued support. I heard it said by a previous Assistant Secretary that agreement with the Basin states that occurred in February was probably as significant as the signing of the Colorado River Compact. Ushers in the possibility of a new way of doing business in an agreeable kind of fashion in the Colorado River. When the Secretary directed that Reclamation initiate shortage guidelines for the lower basin and coordinated operation for Powell and Meade, Reclamation, the states, public interests worked together to develop some proposals to enhance supplies through augmentation and water exchanges, increase conservation and shortage sharing agreements, and new operational guidelines. Our upper and lower Colorado regions of Reclamation are jointly preparing that EIS to analyze those proposals and make recommendations for implementation to the Secretary. That draft EIS was released 2 days ago in February, as promised, although be it the last day of February, but it was published and it's out there. It's on our website if you'd like to see it. I tried to bring a hard copy, but 2 days wasn't enough time to put one on this podium to show you, but it's out there on our website. The public comment period, as we'll go forward, it is open. Public comment period is open through April 30. The proposed federal action considers 4 operational elements that collectively are designed to address the purpose. The interim guidelines would be used by the Secretary to determine those circumstances under which the Secretary would reduce the annual amount of water available for consumptive use from Lake Mead to the Colorado Lower Division states. In other words, shortage. Determine those circumstances under which a shortage would be declared. Those guidelines would define coordinated operation of Lake Powell and Mead, allow for the storage, delivery, pursuant to federal law, of conserved Colorado River system and non-system water in Lake Mead, determine those conditions under which the Secretary may declare the availability of surplus, a set of guidelines which already exists, but expand the term of the surplus guidance to now match the term of the shortage guidance through 2026. The draft EIS presents 4 possible action alternatives for implementation, plus a no-action alternative. Reclamation has not identified a preferred alternative in this draft EIS. Purposefully. I'm going to put the options out there and get the public comment before we identify a preferred alternative. Reclamation received 2 written proposals for alternatives that are included in this EIS. One from the Basin states, which you've heard something about, and one from a consortium of environmental organizations, which I assume you'll hear more about tomorrow. These proposals were used and refined by Reclamation to formulate 2 of the alternatives in our EIS, and they're titled the Basin States Alternative and the Conservation Before Shortage Alternative. A third alternative was formulated called Water Supply Alternative. It was identified by Reclamation. The fourth alternative that's in the document is called Reservoir Storage Alternative, and it was developed in coordination with the Park Service and the Western Area Power Administration. I want to touch on each of them just briefly. The Basin States Alternative proposes coordinated operation of Powell and Mead, would minimize shortages in the lower basin and avoid the risk of curtailment in the upper basin. It provides a mechanism, which you've already heard about, a mechanism called intentionally created surplus for promoting water conservation in the lower basin. That's the Basin States proposal. Conservation before storage alternative includes voluntary, compensated reduction in water use to minimize involuntary shortages in the lower basin and avoid risk of curtailment in the upper basin. This alternative also provides a mechanism for promoting water conservation in the lower basin by expanding the intentionally created surplus mechanism. So it's a bigger mechanism in the conservation before storage, before shortage alternative. The water supply alternative I mentioned is intended to maximize water deliveries at the expense of retaining water in storage. The alternative would implement shortages only when insufficient water was available to meet the need in Lake Mead. The reservoir storage alternative would keep more water in storage in Lake Powell and Mead by reducing water deliveries and increasing shortages to keep that water in the reservoir to benefit power production and recreation. This alternative would also provide a mechanism for promoting water conservation. So we'll be seeking your comments on that draft EIS throughout April. We'll hold public meetings now scheduled April 3, 4, and 5 in Henderson, Nevada, Phoenix, Arizona, and Salt Lake City, respectively, April 3, 4, and 5. It's a lot of work. It's, I think, a pretty good document. It's a draft. That's the way the process works. We plan to issue the final EIS in September of this year and are still on track to issue a record of decision in December this year. Shift gears a little bit. Another NEPA process we are beginning. We'll title it Long-Term Experimental Plan. One of the significant actions that we've recently undertaken. This is focused on Glen Canyon Dam. The development of a long-term experimental program related to flows at the dam. Many of you know our Adaptive Management Work Group, which is a federal advisory committee to the Secretary, is a key element of that adaptive management program. It's providing the basic information for the EIS to be completed in 2 years. We're using that existing process to help us. We just completed the public comment period for scoping, and we expect to have a scoping report available at the end of this month. This is not a supplement to the 1996 EIS, or Record of Decision. That's an important distinction. It is an effort to define and analyze a long-term approach for experimental flows, studies, and releases that will provide scientific data for decisions on Glen Canyon Dam operations and environmental goals and responsibilities downstream of the dam in the Grand Canyon. This action is a key element of a piece of litigation that we were engaged in. So we settled the litigation, and part of that settlement was we'll do this EIS. Part of this EIS will also be NEPA compliance on a temperature control device, potential temperature control device to be installed at Glen Canyon Dam. Temperature is an important issue that has been discovered relative to ESA compliance, and we are looking at, in this EIS, the option of modifying 2 penstocks to provide temperature control, in this case to warm the water coming out of Glen Canyon Dam for the benefit of endangered fish. It's a dicey little situation in that if you warm it too much, there are a few other native and non-native warm water fish that sort of like those little humpback chubs. So it's a tough issue. There's a few other efforts that I want to touch on to stretch water supplies and develop in terms of dividing the pie. Drought continues. Inflow to Lake Powell has now been below average 6 out of the past 7 years. The year 2002 was the lowest recorded flow in 100 years. Provisional calculations would show us that the average flow over the last 7 years was the lowest 7-year average in 100 years. From October 1999 to October 2004, total system storage, how much water was available in storage, decreased from 95% of capacity to 46% of capacity. Your view might be those reservoirs are half empty. Mine is that they are half full. Without that storage, we wouldn't have survived this drought without significant reductions in water supply in both the upper and lower basin. 2005 was a little better. We bumped up, but we had a net loss in storage in 2006. Right now we're about 100 feet down. Don showed you a picture of Lake Powell with 100 feet of space between maximum water surface and where it is today. We had a pretty wet fall this past year. November was dry. One piece of noteworthy information: in October, record-setting rain added over 6 feet of elevation to Lake Powell. It's a lot of water, 700,000 acre-feet of water in 1 month. Since then, unfortunately, there's been a return to drier conditions. The current projected spring runoff to Lake Powell is about 71% of average, bringing in another below-average year. Keep watching outside for the rest of March and April, and by then we'll know what that runoff year is going to look like. But I would also challenge any of you to tell me what next year's snowpack will look like. Jerry covered, I have in here a bunch of things about some of the lower basin activities to conserve water and meet the needs, and I'm not going to go over them again. So I'm going to skip over most of that because he did a really good job of reading from my notes, and I'm going to have to check his internet connection. But in any case, let me touch finally here in a couple of things that are going on in the upper basin. We're starting to look at some non-traditional and innovative proposals that will be underpinned by the strength of the Colorado River Compact. For example, you heard a brief message about we have a proposal before us now for a water contract from Flaming Gorge Reservoir. The idea is a developer would like to build a pipeline across Wyoming and down into the Denver area, the east slope of the Colorado Rockies. We're only one of the players in that mix, but we are looking seriously at why would we not, we being the Bureau of Reclamation in concert with the Basin states, why would we not entertain an idea that would deliver that water supply by contract to a upper Basin state, or to Colorado, Wyoming. So we're looking into that. I also know just peripherally that this developer has made application for some right-of-ways for this particular pipeline. That's about where it is in the process. So that's a bit different. It's a large quantity of water. We're talking, I think Jerry's note said 100,000 to 450,000. That was the sense of the letter. I'm sure that quantity will get revised and negotiated, whatnot, but it's out there, and it's a significant future depletion for the Colorado River. There's another proposal to move water from Lake Powell via pipeline to St. George, Utah. This project's driven by the state of Utah. We, Reclamation, and a host of other agencies are playing a role in that. Thank you. Another water supply project that is the keystone for the Navajo Nation water rights settlement in the San Juan Basin, tributary to the Colorado, is now before us, and Reclamation is working hard to put a planning report draft EIS on the table for a project that we call the Navajo Gallop Water Supply Project. It's a pipeline project that takes water from the San Juan River near Shiprock, moves it straight south all the way to Gallop, New Mexico, and serves the Navajo Nation along the way. So a significant new development idea that fits within Don's sense of where are we going, how fast are we going to develop upper basin supplies. Don mentioned the hydrologic determination. I won't go into that. We've done that. We've determined that near 6 million acre feet is likely available. So in conclusion, a couple of points I would make. Solving the problem of the Colorado River requires a clear understanding of the history of the river's management and the role of the compact. It requires that the interests of the basin states, who are responsible for their own decisions relating to how they use their resources and where they encourage their economic development, be recognized. We have to recognize that this isn't federal water. This is a federal set of facilities, but it's not federal water. The states have those prerogatives. All parties, including the states, tribal governments, public interests, and the federal government, must be brought into the decision-making process. Another concluding point: progress is slow. Resolving issues sometimes takes years to work out, as we've seen over the past decade, but it's possible. The federal government, through the Bureau of Reclamation, provides the overarching support, much of the infrastructure, and serves as the water master in the lower basin. To my knowledge, no one has ever fully calculated the total value of the federal investment in the Colorado River, but consider that it includes the entities of the Colorado River Storage Project, all the CRSP participating projects, Hoover Dam, along with Parker, Davis, and Imperial, the All-American Canal. Then factor in all the hundreds of millions of dollars spent in environmental and endangered species work. Obviously, we're talking about billions of dollars of present-day economic investment and value. The Department of the Interior and the Bureau of Reclamation are here for the long haul, and we seek not only to help solve today's issues, but to position ourselves to effectively deal with those of the future. At the foundation of our collective investment and management actions is the Colorado River Compact. And thank goodness for that. Thank you. Thank you. Looks like we have about 5 minutes. I'll take some questions. Yes, sir.
or soil depletion, fine that is pretty ambiguous at best as far as the yield goes. Same thing with diversions are pretty much going on for, since the last decade. That all seems like status quo, I'm just wondering, if you're a reclamation, you're even truly using it, like maybe helping states understand carrying capacity, or build out capacity of their urban areas to truly allow for sound planning, rather than just the status quo of diverting water here and there and messing up the environment.
Let me say this. My perspective is that how states choose to manage their yield, I don't think many people in this room would suggest is a federal responsibility. I stay out of that a lot. I tend to understand. Let me address that point then. I think there's a lot innovative. I think the fact that we're creating a concept called intentionally created surplus, a brand new idea that didn't exist until 1 year ago. We have it in an EIS. We're proposing to develop guidelines on how to manage water developed through conservation, whether it be compensated or not, the two alternatives I spoke of. Put that water in Lake Mead, Lake Powell, perchance, because that decision hasn't been made. I'm not going to be predeterminal, but the point here is that is very, very unique. And in order for it to happen, the federal government has to figure out a way to put that water, once it's created by states and water users, put it in Lake Powell and make the system work to get it back out. So I think that's about as innovative as you can get. Now, is it rocket science? Jerry said, no, it's not. But it's very different from saying, it's not the way we've done it before. It's very innovative. It's saying, let's think about different ways to achieve that. Other questions? Yes?
Would other basin states have right to create essentially the surplus in Lake Powell?
That debate has been occurring. That was not one of the proposals, keep me honest guys, in the state's proposal. It's about putting that water in Mead. But I've heard those hall talks about would that work, could that work, should that work. The point being that the dialogue has been out there. Is it in the current proposal, in the draft EIS? No. Anything else? Yes, right here.
What is the name of the website where we can use the draft?
Is it ours or LC's? Can I ask my staff? It's LC's. So it's www.lc.usbr.gov. Does that get you there? Yeah, clear in the back.
I'm not clear about storing surplus water in reservoirs in aquifers. They're just going to save water and put it back into highly evaporated reservoirs. I'm not sure you're going to save very much. Is the technology known that you could store this in aquifers that were reducing out of evaporation, and therefore you would bring it?
I think the technology is there, and in some cases it's actually going on. I think the dilemma is it's aquifer specific. You might guess there's not just an aquifer everywhere that you can do that with. There are efficiencies of putting in and taking out. Maybe the point you're asking me is in the federal EIS, is there a concept of storing water in the ground? My answer to you is no. And it has to do with the Bureau of Reclamation and what do we do and what is our role? Could it be done? Certainly. Is it part of this intentionally created surplus? Let's talk about putting it in the ground. I would say the answer to that is no. Sure.
Yeah, a wise person once said that you can't solve a problem if you don't acknowledge it exists. And I think that we disagree as far as whether the power river compact is working or not. I think there's a growing consensus that perhaps it isn't working for the places and the people it's not working for, where it does work for Southern California. It does work for the primary users of water, but I think what you're going to see in the next 20 years is a reversal of federal policy such that the priorities are not favoring dominant economic water interests. And I think That's one of the things I see coming, quite frankly, which is different from what you're saying.
I don't disagree with you. I would attest to you that federal policies have changed and continue to change. 1970, 69 maybe, technically, there was a fairly significant change in federal policy about importance of environment. The NEPA Act, subsequent the ESA. Lots of federal policy changes are made. So I don't disagree with you. And one of the situations that I think we all have to recognize is that if federal policies are going to change, those of us who get to vote, except the Queen, have a democracy here where we can decide what the federal government's policies are all about. Jerry?
Oh, I was just going to mention, Rick, that although it's not in your draft EIS, that is occurring in the Arizona Water Bank, and I'm sure
Correct.
Sid's going to talk about
Correct.
that. California has banks of water
Mm-hmm.
in its facilities for Southern Nevada Water
Yes.
Board. So that is an ongoing program that you could create ICS and put it in banks or put it in these
Yeah.
to give you additional flexibility.
Valid point. Valid point. Thank you for that. That goes to the lady's question back here. Are we doing it? Okay, I think we're done. Thank you.